the primaries. So what did you think of the primaries? I got to be honest. I felt like I didn't have a dog in the hunt in the primaries per se. I watched dispassionately of the election in Virginia. You had a spook going against somebody else who wasn't for healthcare. So for the most part, fundamentally the same person. What was your take on the primaries? Because one of my takes was apparently lefties were taking a hit in these primaries. Or am I misunderstanding this?
Well, I can only speak about California because I was really paying close attention. And I know a lot of the candidates. There were a lot of Bernie delegates. There were a lot of progressive assembly delegates who were running for office, who were heeding Bernie Sanders' call. Yeah. And I did a video on this the other night called Primary Recap Lessons Learned. And the main thing that I got for it, and I also supported some candidates. I had a lot of candidates on my show. I did some campaign work, some paid consulting with some candidates. And my main thing was that our corporate free candidates did not do well. And that was kind of the line in the sand for who was the real progressive. I actually did a series. I had 7 different candidates in a series of shows I did called Will the Real Progressive Please Stand Up? and I interviewed Levy Tilleman, who taped that conversation with Steny Hoyer. I was the first independent journalist to get an interview with him after that. Okay. I interviewed Cara Eastman, who ultimately won her election in Nebraska, even though she didn't get any of the women's groups, and the DCCC supported her opponent, who used to be very anti-choice. And I interviewed some candidates here in California, namely, Doug Applegate, who was down in San Diego. He almost beat Darrell Issa back in 2016. He came within 1,600 votes of him. He was the only Democrat challenging him. And then when Issa decided to retire this year, rather than support Doug, who was the real progressive, they put in this Mike Levin, who is an establishment corporatist. He billed himself as an environmental attorney, when in reality, he represented Exxon, fossil fuel companies. And yes, the project that he was working on was fuel cells, which is considered a bridge fuel. But let's face it, they use, the electricity they get is gotten from fracking. Mm-hmm. And so then Sarah Jacobs came in, this young woman who's never held a job for more than a year. She worked on Hillary's campaign, but her grandfather happens to be the founder of Qualcomm. And she injected $1 million of her own money into her campaign. She got Emily's List. She got NARAL, all those women's groups. And then there was a Paul Kerr in that race who had no chance, but he did some negative advertising on, Levin and Sarah Jacobs. And what happened was Doug Applegate didn't come in second. He didn't come in third. He came in fourth in a race that everybody should have united to support him in. And they were doing that right and left. They did that with trying to think who else in California. But anyway, rather than go through the individual races, what we found was a lot of us were supporting Gail McLaughlin, who ran no party preference. She was the Green Party mayor of Richmond. She was on the Richmond Progressive Alliance. She got endorsed by Bernie in 2014.
Yeah.
And she was running a campaign of organizing. She was going up and down the states, helping to form little local progressive alliances to be like the Richmond Progressive Alliance. Now that she's lost, she's doing the California Progressive Alliance. Well, she lost. She came in, I don't even know, so low down. She got like 2.6%. And the winner was a woman by the name of Eleni Kounalakis, who basically put in $4.2 million of her own money. Her father, who's a wealthy real estate developer, put in $4.8 million of his money. So these millionaires are buying the races. And then the ones that, like, say, Ryan Grimm and Dave Diane in the Huffington Post, the ones that they tried to say are progressive, like Katie Porter, who's in the runoff in Mimi Walters' district, and Katie Hill, who's probably going to make the runoff in Steve Knight's district. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of progressives that didn't support either of those because they're questioning whether they're just Johnny-come-latelys to the progressive issues or not.
Yeah.
Like she was known, Katie Porter, for working with Elizabeth Warren on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But then she also worked for Kamala Harris in the Attorney General's office when she did not prosecute Steve Mnuchin, you know, for the fraudulent foreclosures that One West Bank did.
Yeah.
So she started saying Medicare for all towards the end of the campaign. And what we now know is the Democratic Party instructed people not to use the term single payer. Even Cara Eastman said she's not going to use that term. And they use Medicare for all. And then they talk about we need to move towards Medicare for all. That's the key. Or else they talk about universal health care. Like even Gavin Newsom, who was the nurses candidate, who they put their thumb on the scale by endorsing him in 2016 before there were any other people in the race, he started backing away from our single payer bill, SB 562. So I feel like it's very difficult to run corporate free unless you're running for president of the United States and you have every progressive in the country supporting you, like Bernie. He was able to run competitively against Hillary, may have even raised more money than Hillary from small dollar donations. However, when you think about that, we were running candidates in local races, city council, state assembly, state senate, federal races, Congress, Senate. We had 4 candidates challenging Dianne Feinstein. So was it going to be Kevin DeLeon, who had the most name recognition, or was it going to be people I supported like David Hildebrand and Pat Harris? And then you had TYT putting their thumb on the scale for, you know, Alison Hartson, who basically skipped 7 debates that friends of mine organized in Pasadena, in Torrance, in Ventura County, in the Inland Empire. She confirmed for these debates, and then she didn't show. So she thought she could just go on TYT and run it, you know, and no, she didn't do well either. Pat Harris got more votes.
That's wow. That's okay. Wow. That's brutal. That's utterly brutal.
So we had progressives had a lot of losses in California, but I'm working. I figured out 5 races. Maria Estrada, here's a lesson learned. Maria Estrada is taking on Anthony Rendon because Anthony Rendon shelved our single payer bill. Yeah. She got 7,600 votes, and those are all new voters because Anthony Rendon got the same 25,000 votes he got in 2016. His Republican opponent got the same 12,000 votes he got in 2016. So these like 7,690 votes that Maria got, all new voters. So if we converge on that district, he's not well liked in his district. And it's not just because of single payer. It's because they have a lot of environmental problems that he has done nothing about. So if we converge on that district, also my friend Elizabeth Warren, who we call California's own Elizabeth Warren, because they have the same name. She came in neck and neck. She beat by a few hundred votes the establishment Democrat.
Good for her.
Margie Castellano, who beat the Republican incumbent in San Diego, she beat her in San Diego County. She lost to her in Orange County, but she makes the runoff. Then Robert Rivas, who is, comfortable. He came in, I think he came in first in Northern California, San Benito County. He led the anti-fracking effort from the city council. Mm-hmm. And then Javanka Beckles, if she wins, or Dan Kalb, who's another progressive in 15, against Buffy Wicks, who we call Buffy the Bernie Slayer, because she ran Hillary's campaign in California. And she got a lot of money. She got the Democratic support. She got the elected official support. And Tony Thurmond, by the way, who is running for school public instructor and against the charter school guy, we have to support Tony Thurmond, but he really screwed Javanka because he's African-American, Javanka's African-American, but Javanka's corporate free. So Tony, even though they served on the Richmond City Council together, got this woman, Rochelle Pardue, another African-American, who was on the city council in another community, to enter the race to split the black vote.
No way.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because they have such a thing as the Legislative Black Caucus. And like the Latino caucus, they take a lot of corporate money. So they didn't relish the idea of Javanka, who's pledged proudly to be corporate free, to join their ranks. So Buffy Wicks, the white woman, Buffy the Bernie Slayer, joins with Tony Thurmond to support, Rochelle, who didn't even place. I mean, so now it's like Javanka is 552 votes behind Dan Kalb to make the runoff. But even if Jovanka doesn't make it, I'm still going to support Dan Kalb. And I'm suggesting that we support these 4 candidates that I named, plus Alex Villanueva, who is the reformist candidate for LA County Sheriff. He made the runoff against the existing Sheriff, Bob McDonnell. Bob McDonnell was supposed to clean up the corruption. Our old Sheriff, Lee Baca, is in jail, along with his deputy, Paul Tanaka, for corruption and kickbacks.
No way.
And horrible conditions in the jails. So Bob McDonnell was supposed to clean it up. He didn't clean it up. Actually, Alex Villanueva was the whistleblower who blew the whistle on these conditions. And he is in the runoff. So I'm suggesting that if we can get our shit together, which is dubious, if all the Bernie-crats in California can get behind these 5 candidates and we win, then we show that we are a real force. But we have to be strategic. What happened was every Bernie-crat and his uncle decided to run for office, you know, because, and then Bernie comes here last weekend, the weekend before the primary, and doesn't endorse anybody, doesn't campaign with anybody. The only candidate he endorsed in California was Nanette Barragan, who, you know, I held a fundraiser for her. I thought she was going to be progressive. She's great on the environment. But guess what? She co-authored the anti-BDS bill in Congress.
No way. Are you shitting me?
Yes.
And that's the person that Sanders endorsed?
Yes, and she voted with the other Democrats to water down Dodd-Frank.
That is profoundly anti-free speech. Like,
so not only
that is profoundly anti-free speech. That bill.
Yes,
that's villainous and treasonous bill.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened was he does 3 rallies on behalf of, first he comes to Disneyland on behalf of the Disney workers in Anaheim. Yeah. Then he goes to Carson on behalf of the longshoremen. Then he goes to LA on behalf of the Real Justice PAC, which was Sean King and Patrice Cullors.
Right. I saw that one. BLM, Black Lives Matter thing.
And there were thousands of people going to his rallies. And what did that do? It took the volunteers off the campaign trail in the last weekend of Go TV, Get Out the Vote, to go stand online to hear Bernie, who doesn't mention one single candidate from the podium.
Why don't you? That's man, you said a lot there. So there are 3 things I want to hit. When TYT first started supporting candidates, the Justice Democrats thing, there were a few of us who said, I didn't like it when when Hillary Clinton was propped up by MSNBC. And the way that MSNBC would coddle Clinton on a lot of the stuff and not give coverage to Sanders. It seemed grossly unfair, and it seemed extremely, you know, it's like, it's so over the top. It took Sanders halfway into the campaign before they even acknowledged that the man existed. Yeah. So this idea with TYT, my thing was the idea of fusing a media company with a political body. This media company is supposed to be honest and straightforward when it's giving its news, whereas politics is just full of bias. I mean, let's be honest. These guys are liars and these guys are full of bias. And you have the situation where TYT now has candidates that TYT likes in the same way that the media has their candidates that they liked. I didn't like it when the media was kind of edging out Sanders and supporting Clinton. I don't necessarily like it when TYT is picking winners from the same way. I think it feels weird to me. You have a media company, and my thing was, you are going to have other lefties in the race. Like there's going to be some situation where there's one lefty that TYT says, yes, we're supporting this one lefty. But what happens when you're in somewhere like California and there are like 4 lefties who are trying to run in a particular district and you say, this is our guy? Now, TYT will also complain, however, that the DCCC is choosing candidates also. The DCCC comes out, puts their thumb on a ballot and says, we want this guy, Steny Hoyer, telling the person to get out the race. While TYT is also saying, we like this person. Alison Hartson, and the person that you're saying, was on that network constantly. Constantly, every time she's, you know, a preview for this. If I'm not mistaken, she was even doing part of like talk shows like every Wednesday or something, like some insane amount. They picked their winners in the same way that the DCCC was picking their winners. They didn't like it when the DCCC did it. Apparently, I guess they're okay when they're doing it. Oh, and the other part, that is a brutal record of failure from someone on the left in California. That is painful. Why don't you think Sanders supports those guys? Is it because Sanders